Hello and welcome to this demo of me painting Shores Acres, which is a state park in Oregon. I never actually went to this beach, but as you can see, it is stunningly beautiful. My friend took a picture and he sent it to me and I had to paint it. I don't usually actually paint pictures that I haven't gone to or that I didn't take because I find it hard to relate sometimes, but this was just one of those exceptions. So this is gonna be a sped up time lapse of me blocking the painting in and getting the first stage done, because in this video I actually want to focus on how I apply my last finishing touches. So that's going to be later in this video. I think it's actually really fun when the funnest part of a painting actually is when you have gotten past that first hump of, okay, I blocked out everything looks pretty good, the values are good. Now the next stage is to really slow down and really pick at these really minute details that push the painting to just change the painting in drastic ways, like the smallest changes that can just make a world of difference, whether it just be slight color shifts in some areas in the shadows, or just adding a dry brush stroke in certain areas to create more texture. Really subtle things like that. I have tons of fun with that, and it's really amazing to me how much you can push a painting even further. Now, this painting was actually originally done as a live demo for my mentorship students. So that is actually one of the benefits that you get by signing up. I do live demos every other week, and I alternate between traditional and digital, depending, of course, on what my students want to see. And so in this live demo, they got to see me paint this real time from start to finish, and also ask questions along the way, on why I would be doing this stroke, and why I'd be, doing this or doing that. And I also explain my process all the way through. So if this is something you're interested in and you want to work with me, like I said before in previous videos, I have 2 more terms coming up, one in the summer and one in the fall. And you get things like these, like personalized critiques and also live demos where you get to see me paint live in real time and commenting and explaining my process all the way through. So this painting was actually a real toughie, and it may not seem like it because there's a lot of big shapes and, it's mostly in silhouette, but to me personally, silhouettes can actually be the hardest thing to paint because you can infuse so much color. And moving things, moving elements like water and texture, things like rocks are never easy. So this was a fun one to tackle. And in the beginning, I wasn't quite happy with how things were turning out, but I think towards the end, as you can see now, I'm a little bit more happy with the block in, and I can finally see everything coming together where I can go, okay, now I think I'm ready to slow down a little bit. Now that I've gotten more or less all the shapes that I have and everything is reading okay in value, although there's still some value tweaks, and I can go ahead and move on to the next stage of really cracking down on those more little details. So now we're entering into working on the final touches, and you can see I sort of took some time off camera to finesse the rocks in the bottom left corner. I really had no idea how to do this for the longest time, so I needed some time to figure it out and not, completely waste all my precious camera time. And really in those rocks on the bottom, it's just figuring out shapes and carving out with light and shadow, the creases and the top part of the rocks, and thinking of it in terms of planes. Now right now I am working on the bottom right where all this water kind of spills over these rocks. And again, I'm really not sure how to tackle it, but I just know that I'm gonna have to, instead of trying to paint all the detail, I'm gonna have to do actually really quick confidence strokes to get that energy of the rushing water. Right now it doesn't seem like I'm doing that, but I play around a lot before I get something that I want. So this area is interesting because there's part of it is being hit with light, and then part of the water is in shadow. Now, my goal with some of these parts in the water and shadow is that I don't just have one kind of blue. I want to infuse warmer blues and cooler blues. That's my goal. Even some blue mixed with a little yellow ochre to get even maybe some greenish tones. I'm never thinking in terms of one kind of blue. You can see now as I'm whittling down, I use a round brush a lot more, and I'm actually using a lot of dry paint. The dry paint technique, which I have also mentioned in my other videos, is a really great way to brush texture and color shifts on top without kind of committing full way. So if I want to get a more subtle sort of texture or subtle color shift, I'll use like really dry paint, and I'll mix a lot of white, and then a lot of the colors I need to, I think white for me kind of acts as a thickening agent. And then that's how, and make sure my brush is really dry with no water. And that's how I'll just brush the color on top. You can see here when I don't want something super thick and super white, I'm sort of brushing lighter values of blue on top of my base so that I can have those little shifts. I'm still not too happy with the waves at this time. To me, I feel like they need a little bit more depth. So later you'll see me adding a little bit more shadow in some areas of the water. For the waves, it really helps me to think of it as just light and dark. But after a while, you really have to think about how to add a little bit more depth, so it's not so flat. And I think I struggle with that a lot. So now I'm gonna just start going in the back. That back area of the water's in shadow, and again, part of it's being hit by light. So I'm having a lot of fun with these blues, these kind of purplish baby blues. It's one of my favorite colors. And I'm also gonna start adding complexity in the back with the rocks. Now you're probably seeing the reference that my colors look nothing like the reference. And sometimes people ask me, how do I know what color to put? Because in the reference almost looks like, I don't know, like a gray or one muted blue or something. You know, everyone sees colors differently, but this comes a lot with observing every day and just taking the time to look at things and take it in with your eyes and tell yourself out loud, okay, what colors do I see? And that way you practice photo memory. So even though I'm not always painting all the time, I'm always observing, and that really helps when I go to my paintings and let's say I'm painting from a photo that of a place that I've never been to before. How am I gonna, I've never actually witnessed the site for myself. So how do I go on, painting this painting and making it personal? And a lot of it I draw from photo and color memory. So you can see I sort of bump and jump all over the place. Now I'm just trying to dry brush some more texture on the water. I go back and fix the water so many times, it's not even funny. But that's what it's all about, right? It's about, not being content and pushing and pushing and pushing until you get something that you think you have achieved and that you can achieve the best at that moment. Might not be the best in a month because you'll probably be even better, but at that moment, push yourself until you think that you have done everything you can. At least that's what I try to do. So as I said before, now I'm just adding some rocks in the back, fixing up the value because they're a little bit too dark. Just some indication of complexity in the back is nice. Right now the silhouette rocks are still pretty blocky, so I'm going to be adding hints of light later on the planes that hit the light to really give more shape and structure. There's also these really nice glitz of gleam on the rocks where the water is shining from the sun. So I'll definitely want to capture that too on the rocks to give really that feel of wetness. So I think one of the funnest things to do also, besides pushing and pulling color shifts, is pushing and pulling certain values in some areas. And what I mean by that is making some places darker to really get that subtle pop or more contrast, or making some things lighter. In this case, I think I need to make the back cliffs a little bit darker because the very back one is reading a little bit light. So right now I'm just adjusting the values but also the color. And they're tricky because sometimes when you like what you had as a base, you don't want to completely erase everything. So it's always kind of scary when you're adjusting, but sometimes you just got to take those bold moves and you got to just go for it. Sometimes it means painting over something completely, but you always learn something new either way. So you see how before it was sort of a really light pink if you toggle back, but now I just made it a little bit darker, a little bit more cooler. And I also want to finesse the shape language. So there's some trees in the back on these cliffs. And so I want to just ruffle up the edges a little bit to give that feeling of more something organic on top of those cliffs. And with things like silhouettes, when I'm tackling big shapes and they're mostly in shadow, I always try to have some warm and cool tones, even though, you can really make it graphic and just make it, one cooler tone. But for me, I love to infuse just those slight temperature shifts. So you see my back rocks, there's some warmer purples and then some maybe cooler greens. On the bottom, there's some slightly warmer hints as well. So I'm never trying to stick to, I guess, one temperature per se. And also playing with different slight color shifts, even within the same hue. Like in the water, I have, like I said before, I have like purpler blues and greener blues, and they read also as warmer and cooler with each other. You can see here I'm just continuing to add more complexity, just implying it. I'm really not going to overwork it too much because those are in the distance, right? But all those little strokes really helps. So you can see an even bigger zoom up here. Now I'm just going to start to give these rocks a little bit more depth so that they're not so flat. This was pretty hard too, because sometimes I make the value too dark and then I have to push and pull back and make it lighter. So it's always a push and pull. It's never smooth sailing, right? So you can see even when I'm dealing with smaller shapes, I'm still using my flat brush. Like I said before, I don't ever change from the round brush and the flat brush. Those are my two brushes that I use, and since I learned to manipulate it in most ways that I need it to, I don't need any other brushes to get even in small corners. So now I'm really, pushing and pulling with temperature shifts. When I load my brush, I load warm and cool colors. I'm loading yellow and blue and white at the same time, so that when I brush it down, it will create a gradient of all those colors kind of beautifully meshed together, but not too blended together. It always reminds me of those rocks you see, I don't know, in Zion, like those layered rocks, beautiful sedimentary rocks, those layers of color that you get. And that's how I imagine when I pull my paint across and you get all these colors at the same time. So I'm not too happy right now with how my light areas are reading in the rocks. I really need to fix that. So you'll see me doing that in just a bit. Right now I'm just trying to make this rock a little bit darker as well. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make the top parts darker, and then I'm going to keep the bottom a little bit more misty where the cliff meets the water, so that you get that impression of the mist and the water mist kind of engulfing the bottom of the rocks. Atmosphere, I suppose, yes. You can see sometimes when I put on a color that's too dark, I pull it across to sort of stretch it out and make it less dark. But right now I'm painting pretty thick for the most part. I'm building up my painting with more paint as I progress. So now I'm starting to just carve out the rocks a little bit more. So I'm taking my round brush and my flat brush, and I'm just selectively dabbing on areas, trying to also create that impression of the wet glisten of the water. Now for these light parts, I'm by no means using white. I actually don't use white for any part of this painting because white is it's not a color. It'll just kind of make the whole painting bland. You can try it out for yourself. If you actually put white on, it doesn't, it's kind of a cheap way to add glisten unless you really, really need a blown out highlight. Now for the light parts of the rock, it's actually more mixing like white, yellow, ochre, and sky blue to get this kind of really light pale green. So it's actually really desaturated green. Now you can see when I'm putting the light parts of the rock on, I'm simultaneously carving out more grooves and more shapes. And so now I'm giving more form to the rocks. Now I don't want to give too much because again, these are in the distance. So too much will just jar the eye a little bit, but just enough just to give that hint of complexity. An artist that does this really well is Edward Seago. If you study his paintings, he's one of my favorite artists of all time. He's just absolutely amazing. I could just go on and on about him, but he is really, really great in his paintings of boats and shores. He does a lot of paintings of boats and the water and the shorelines of Holland, I think, and all these moody clouds, because Holland has a lot of clouds, that purple moody clouds that look like it's about to rain. And he is a master of just implying boats in the distance, or sometimes cows in the distance, sometimes clumps of trees, just with a brushstroke. He does it really efficiently, and he is really, really one to study for how to trick the eye and add complexity in the back, but you're not really even trying hard to add it. Just implication. So now I'm feeling a little bit better about how the rocks are forming. You can see, I find it so fascinating that when you just add a light side, you just start to see all these different planes and different grooves come to life. So that's really fun to do. I think that highlight might be a little bit too light. We'll see if I darken that up a little bit later. But I think just some sparks of light in some areas are okay. So another way to also carve out the rocks is also by finessing the water and the edge where the water meets the rock. So you can also carve out like that. And I think about that concept for almost everything, for painting trees and the sky, for painting, anything really, like cows on the land, how you can paint the cow in, and then carve out the cow, finesse the shape of the land around it, for example. That was a really random example. And I'm just dry brushing some atmosphere on top. So again, I'm using that really, really dry brush, loading my brush with really dry paint, almost basically no water, and just lightly brushing on top. That really, really helps in creating atmosphere. So adding a lot of these minute details is really dependent on value. If you're not putting down the right value, it doesn't really matter what color you're putting down. It will just look off. So that is something that I always stress, and I work with my students in my mentorship, making sure that you understand those fundamentals of composition and value before you start going all wacko and crazy with color. So for example, if I had made the rocks in the back too dark or too light in comparison to the water, it would have been completely off. If I made the sky too dark, something would have been off. Everything in value is in relation to each other. Whether you're, also it depends on what key you're painting, high key, low key, and mid key. This would be considered a mid key painting. So I'm adding lights and darks, but in relation to each other. The value has to make sense with the other values around it. And that goes the same for color relationships. So now you can see I'm starting to just dry brush some more texture on the water. And this is a really easy way to be able to indicate waves and the froth. And you see that I have bigger shapes in the foreground with the waves, and I try to just dab a little bit more complexity in the back, but not too much. Again, it's that fine balance. So when you're adding these details, it's important to just slow down. When you're not sure where to add something, look at the reference photo, squint at your painting, and it will tell you the answers. You want to get to the point where your painting is telling you the answers and guiding you. And that is when you know where to go, the next step. Obviously, sometimes, you could get brain farts, but you want to eventually get to that level. So I'm always constantly stepping back and squinting and seeing, okay, what am I missing? What can be added? What can be taken away? Squinting is really your best friend, because it'll tell you what you really don't need sometimes that you didn't realize before because you're so tunnel visioned. Of course, now I'm just adding some dry brush texture on the bottom. Those rocks are really textured in the foreground, so I really already simplified it a lot. Again, now I'm just finessing the top edges of those trees. And they're really, really small details again. I'm not using big broad strokes anymore. That was in the beginning of the painting, and now I'm saving those smaller strokes for the end. But I'm still using a big brush. Now I'm just, again, adjusting the value. So I'm dry brushing some darker values in some areas, and then some lighter values in other areas. Like I said before, pushing and pulling values. Sometimes if you just darken just a little part of your painting, it will in turn push contrast and make another part of your painting stand out. And those really small differences that can make a difference. Really small changes that can make a difference. So here is the final image. I did work on the wave a little bit more, the focal point wave, off camera because I just wasn't happy with the shape. And I ended up messing up a little bit and then bringing it back to a little better. You can see I added just slight darker values in some areas of the waves to push that depth even more. But yeah, I'm pretty happy with how the final product turned out. I hope you liked it too. And I hope you enjoyed this demo. And as usual, I usually have a demo coming out every Friday. I alternate between traditional and digital, so stay tuned for that. I'd really appreciate it if you liked, subscribed, and shared this video with other people. And of course, follow me at Tiffanie Mang Art for more updates. And if you're interested in working with me for mentorships, shoot me an email. So I'll see you guys all soon. Thanks for watching. Bye.